Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said, because I was also having this constantly at the back of my mind for every statement that I made. That does not mean when I say this that I'm then advocating for prostitution. I will say partly. It's not going anywhere, whether we like it or not.
The reason for prostitution being illegal in most states in the US has to do with the fact that the US is largely influenced by Christian values, so for moral and religious foundation reasons. And sex outside marriage is viewed as a sin in Christianity for this reason, especially for money. And for these reasons, the lawmakers back in the early American history, they built that into the norms and into the law. Does this make sense or not? And every time you tell me whether it makes sense, keep in mind that we now have this virtual sex working thing and it's legal.
I mean, I feel like it definitely doesn't make sense to me. And I know why I feel like it's so. I think one thing that the US is definitely struggling from update on a lot of this of their amendments, so to say, right? Say like, and I think it's the same for a lot of countries also. Like to really update some things is quite difficult. You have to go through this rigorous process, and I would argue it's more of that or more about that than their Christian values. Germany is a more Christian country than the US, in my opinion, and prostitution is legal in Europe, for example.
Would that be that at least in most countries in Europe, in some countries in Europe, Western Europe mainly, but would it be the case that the lobbyists for legalizing prostitution in Western Europe are just much more successful than the American lobbyists? Because they're actually lobbyists in the US. And usually what lobbyists would do, organizations that want it to be legal, they will even draft what the policy should look like, and it's just passing through readings.
No, my argument is I don't think the US is a more Christian country than comparing it to Germany now. So like I don't think they have the religious ground for the claim that they are saying. Maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, they do have that, but not the US right now. They don't. It's not as religious.
Yeah, I agree. And even when you look at the very clear fact that OnlyFans is legal, right? Pornhub is legal. How is this not then completely smashing that religious ground? Because the idea of the religious ground is, again, sex outside of marriage, especially sex for money.
Yeah.
Right? And also sex for everyone to watch. And now you have all these sexual content creators. How is that legal in a country that is standing the moral ground on prostitution?
I think it's more about updating their laws and stuff than the religious thing. I think when they made this statement that you just read, it was absolutely true. But that was probably maybe 100 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. Much longer time ago. Okay. Now, the second reason, according to ChatGPT, is for public health concerns. So the idea is that the government believes that prostitution spreads STIs, and for this, so STIs, sexually transmitted infections. And for this reason, they believe that they need to regulate it, right, to ensure the safety of both the sex workers and the client and the public. But the American government believes that it's difficult to actually legalize prostitution and enforce safety. What do you think about this?
I mean, thinking about the healthcare system in the US, maybe they are right, but it doesn't make it true for every country.
But the healthcare system will only kick in when things have gone wrong, right? I think when you have a structure like what they have in Western Europe, for example, not with regards to healthcare, but with regards to how they have legalized it, where it can happen and all that stuff, there's a lot of preventive actions required.
For sure. I mean, I definitely agree with you. I feel like if they are bothered about STIs or STDs, they are better off making it legal and being able to control, because they can then better control the situation. Like we've seen in Europe as an example also. It's like another example is like the weed situation. Like for so many years, it's been illegal in like so many places in the world. But now they've come to the realization that if we actually do control these in a way that people can now use it, that helps more people. I mean, there is no absolute in this sort of situation, right? But you have to just weigh your options, which is a better outcome. Then when you legalize
Yep.
something like that, then you can then control it. You can then say if you have more than this kilogram, it's then like a crime. Then if you do more than, so all these things can then come into play. And if you put that in like the situation of the STDs and all, then you can control things and be like, oh, you have to come for regular checkups. You have to do this every 3 months. If you don't do that, then
Exactly.
you
And you can do it as a group. They will have an association. There will be companies that you can hold responsible. So instead of trying to hold 1 million sex workers responsible, you probably have 10 massive companies that will always make sure that the workers underneath, or 50 massive companies, and it will be on the state level anyways. It's like, I think this is probably also why in Germany, for example, you go to a city and you hear maybe they have 5 houses where this is happening, and they can actually control those houses and what needs to go in there when it comes to preventive actions.
for sure.
And as I keep reading these things that is coming from ChatGPT as some of the reasons for the illegality of prostitution in some American states, I'm thinking, what? I think that they are just looking at prostitution in at least, now this is not me advocating for prostitution. However, when you think about what's happening with OnlyFans, I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have. It's either it's there or it's not there. Yeah, it doesn't make sense with this OnlyFans and prostitution thing. But I'm looking at this and it's talking about how prostitution might foster human trafficking, underage sex, coercion, and exploitation of young girls, etc. But I think they're only looking at it in a vacuum of when it was illegal, this is how it is run. But when you have a legal route to it, why should it still foster trafficking and exploitation? Because that's the argument that a lot of people have made for things like OnlyFans. In fact, they call it freedom.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said, because I was also having this constantly at the back of my mind for every statement that I make. That does not mean when I say this that I'm then advocating for prostitution. I will say partly. It's not going anywhere, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Women
Yeah.
from ages, I think prostitution is said to be the oldest profession for like ever for humans.
And it's not just women. I even want to correct you there. And in today's world,
Yeah, exactly. It's like engaging the world and seeing how things are. For sure. And I said women because I was trying to drive to this point where whether directly or indirectly, sex is a valuable asset for women.
absolutely.